Welcome, everybody, to the very first episode of Rings of Power, Sweet or Sour. I'm your host, Tyler,
And I'm your other host, Drew.
and so in this episode, the idea is we're going to give you a little bit of a recap of the episode, what kind of our expectations are for the show, and any sort of interesting subplots or details that we might have noticed about um, Rings of Power. And this is recorded September 3rd, which is the Saturday after the Thursday in which episode 1 and 2 of Rings of Power dropped on Amazon Prime. Um, and here we are. I think expectations for the show are sky high. After a quick glance at the IMDb page, we're a full 2.0 uh, rating below House of Dragons, so we might be getting blown out a little bit by the Game of Thrones competition, but I think expectations are still very high right now.
I also know that Amazon stopped anyone from being able to rate the show on Amazon because so many people were just giving it 1 star ratings before even watching it. So I'm not taking those IMDb ratings. I'm not trusting them at all.
I think Game of Thrones fans, I did not hear a single person who was not excited about House of Dragon to come out. Not really being a Game of Thrones fan myself, I don't really care that much about it, but Lord of the Rings fan base has a very high expectations for the quality of content that they get, and I think a lot of people are Tolkien purists and or just purists of the first three films, where it's going to be hard for them to really accept anything else.
Yeah, because I think we're sort of teetering on the brink right now. We had 3 fantastic movies made, and then I'll throw my opinion on the Hobbits movies out there. We had 3 poorly made movies. So we're 3-3 right now, and this TV show is going to sort of determine whether or not it's a well-made franchise or a poorly made franchise.
And I think it's interesting you say that, Drew, because my take is The Hobbit. It was actually pretty fun, but I think it was too drawn out. Um, and I think
Yeah.
that's just a trend that's happening in film right now is to draw things out longer and longer and make them more and more epic and in detail so that you can kind of milk them for all the money that they're worth. And I mean, if I always like to compare the Lord of the Rings books to movies versus the Hobbit books to movies. Like they fit, like an 800-page book into a single movie for each Lord of the Rings film versus The Hobbit, where it was maybe like a 400-page book they extended to 3 movies.
And the Hobbit itself has some scenes like in the book though where it's like, oh, they fought their way across the cavern lopping off the troll king's head and escaped. So like that happens in 1 sentence. So part of me understands why they extended it, but part of me agrees with your idea of people stretching things out to make them more epic because I don't think 3 movies was necessary for The Hobbit.
But here's where we're at. I mean, we have a book which, from what I can tell from episode one, is or a move or a series now, a TV series, which basically is taking the book, the Silmarillion, as I can tell it, and maybe a couple of the other offshoot Tolkien books that I haven't really read, and stretching it into a series that I'm not even sure what the plan is for how long that these are going to be, but we are probably looking at several seasons worth of money generating content for Amazon after what they paid for these shows to make these shows.
If I remember correctly, I read something where they said they're committing to 5 seasons. Um, this could be me just making something up. This could be me remembering something true. So I think 5 seasons is their goal.
I think it's good. I think it's good that if they do have that limit, that's kind of helpful in actually writing the script, so we don't have another, Star Wars final trilogy scenario
Ugh,
where it's sort of written on the fly, or even Game of Thrones. I mean, was pretty much written on the fly the last couple of seasons. So um,
yeah.
I like to know with my, especially like my epic high fantasy, that there's a plan for where this thing is going, and I would definitely appreciate that in this series.
And I know Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, who's making this, he said that when he purchased it, his son looked at him and said, or he purchased the rights. His son looked at him and said, "Don't screw it up." So they better hold up to that.
Man, so and I think that's a good transition actually, because I think a lot of people unfortunately already feel like this thing is screwed up. Before I even watched the show, I saw a news article called "The Rings of Power is kind of a catastrophe," and people are making that statement after only 2 episodes. I think it needs a little bit more time to come up to speed. Frankly, this is a universe which most people aren't really familiar with. It's kind of a complicated universe in terms of lore, and it's not all gonna make sense after 1 episode. And I think after watching only the first episode, there was a lot of world building and character introduction, like so much character introduction. I actually couldn't believe how many different plot lines they started to
Right away.
introduce. Yeah,
Yeah.
in episode one, which really actually makes me a little bit well, I'm curious how they're going to tie it all together, if they're going to tie it all together. Um, it seems like there's kind of the main plot line, which uh, here's kind of that recap part, but seems like Galadriel's hunt for Sauron is kind of going to be the big thing, the big ticket item, or the big quest of the series, at least for starters.
Yeah.
Um, but
Like the storyline that I think eventually all the other ones will tie into is that one.
yeah, but I'm a little nervous that they started it the way that they did. If you think of like Fellowship of the Ring, like that starts off as small as possible. You're literally in Hobbiton with just like
Having a
four
party.
four friends having a party, and the characters are introduced nice and slowly. There's Gandalf, and then there's the Fellowship, and it's actually a really nice way to get to know different characters. This one we've kind of been thrust into a lot of characters, a lot of storylines all at once, and I'm not sure who to care about or who's even like a good person or what everyone wants to do. I don't know.
And I think that's the Game of Thrones effect. I think Game of Thrones' success is affecting the way they're making Rings of Power. With all of these storylines all over the place, with all these characters, and us not really knowing how we feel about the people in the show after episode one. Like you were saying at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, they have like this big birthday party and we feel good. We enjoy the hobbits. We see a little bit of their personality, but it is really small. And it's that like that's the main central storyline and that's all we're focused on. But they're trying to be super huge and expansive right now, as I feel like they should. I don't think that a TV show right now being made would be super successful if they followed the same pattern they did 20 years ago. Um,
Yeah, I definitely think that's valid. I just as like a first take after episode one, I was kind of hoping that they would go off script a little bit and write about not the epic battle between good and evil necessarily, but maybe some smaller like subplots of and maybe there will be those things, but we're just kind of introducing everything at once. Um, but I think what is happening here is Lord of the Rings kind of has the Death Star effect of Star Wars, where they started off and everything had to be, the stakes were the entire world being destroyed basically in the original trilogy, and now we're finding that anything less than that is sort of unsatisfying. So we have to have the big
mhm.
baddies introduced uh, immediately, which
Within seconds.
right, which is one reason why I really appreciate the Hobbit book, is that it's not really about the fate of the universe, but it actually ties into it via the ring, which you don't suspect until you get to the Lord of the Rings, which is really a brilliant way to have the two series tied together because you never realized how big of a deal it was that that little ring was found. But here we are, and we already know that Sauron is the big baddie. Um, Galadriel's on the hunt for him. I guess let's just jump into a little bit of a recap of what actually happened in episode one. Uh, I think like four-ish individual plot lines got introduced, um, each with their own main character. Obviously, the big one, Galadriel hunting Sauron after her brother Finrod was killed by him. Um, and this is good. I mean, Galadriel seemed like she seemed very intense. She seemed kind of like what an elf you would sort of expect to be like. But I think since the original trilogy, they've kind of been more and more humanized in terms of their emotions and their like nobility. Like in the original trilogy, they were very, very serious, and you
And
didn't
very
really
like regal feeling, like
exactly.
very like higher power almost.
Yeah. And then you had them in the cold, and that one guy's just like whining so hard to Galadriel, and he's like, "I'm not going any further."
I mean,
And
he's technically not wrong. Like, yeah, he was whining, but like some of the things he was saying, I was like, yeah, I sort of agree.
but I'm like, man, my Tolkien elves, like they should just be fine right there, right? Like, um, uh, wow, I cannot remember Legolas. Legolas was just like walking on top of the snow, and nothing ever seemed to affect him. Um,
Hmm.
and these high elves, like in the books, are almost even more sort of magical than kind of like Legolas's branch of elves, more regal, more noble. Um, and it just didn't come off that way with the company, especially that Galadriel was with. Like they fought that snow troll, and it seemed like no one else could really do a thing besides Galadriel.
Oh, they got destroyed by the snow troll, except for as yeah, Galadriel like took the snow troll out easily.
But yeah, so I mean, curi curiously, the way that ended was, basically all those other like more whiny elves, like they went off to the Undying Lands, where all good elves go in the end, and Galadriel chooses not to, which is cool. I think she's probably the character who showed the most conflict in the first episode, and that line where the Elf King, the High King of the elves, is talking about how she actually is going to cause more evil by seeking out Sauron and trying to kill him, like bringing him about basically by trying to fight him off. Um, I think it was interesting and probably gave us the best preview of what that main quest is going to look like.
That story plot. Yeah. And it was interesting that she made that decision at the very end. Like she got on the boat. She was gonna go. She was gonna do it. And she decided the literal last second that she was gonna change her mind. And she's really dedicated to that change of mind because that swim back is going to be very, very long. I don't know how long, but I cannot imagine
Right?
how
Like,
much that stuck.
how long were they actually in the boats before the gates of heaven opened and
They made it
welcomed them
seem like
into
a
the
long
lands?
time. Yeah.
Yeah, so the other thing that was kind of funny about that scene was, as all good elves should do, they're all just standing on the boat, very nobly, like holding their swords in full armor and perfect lines, um, just as you would do on a boat for days and days at a time. Um, but yeah, that swim back, I think it's pretty funny that she just jumped right off and was like, I could make it back.
That's
But
she's dedicated to her cause for sure.
yeah, she's legit. The other, I guess, maybe interesting plot lines, we got the Harfoots, which I think are pretty much precursors to the Hobbits of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They seem to kind of have, they're small, they sort of hide from the bigger folk, which is very
And
true to
the
Tolkien.
Brandyfoot name too.
Yeah, yeah. So the main Nori, right?
Hmm.
Nori Brandyfoot, possibly a combination of the Proudfoot name and the Brandybuck name, as Drew pointed out to me before this episode, that you see in from the actual Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. So. I
But
like
yeah,
that they include some hobbits in this. I think it brings the scope down from everything being so serious. There's sort of a more fun aspect of the plot, and uh, unlike the elves who can kind of just have superpowers and get away with everything, they have to be a little more creative in how they approach things.
and I mean they're following the same like idea of like the like, hobbits like hiding from the big folks, and then there's this one who is open adventures, right? Which is a staple of Tolkien's storylines. I think like literally 5 minutes before we met Nori, I looked at my roommate and I said, if they don't have hobbits in this show, I'm gonna turn it off. And so I was just so happy when we saw the little Harfoots pop up because you have to have like a hobbit character.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Nori, I think, is she's kind of embodying that more adventurous um, uh, sentiment that ultimately Bilbo and Frodo end up getting by the end of their adventures. But she is already like born, like that she's going to be the one. And then at the very end of the episode, this also was an interesting and unexpected thing, was that meteor with I don't know, it crashed and there was a person there. But Nori was the first person on the scene, and
Mm.
so she clearly was not afraid of that thing happening. So um, the other main plot line I could identify really. What?
Do you do you think what do you think about that person in the meteor?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you have yeah?
Great question. I thought that it was uh, Sauron originally. I think they're um, introducing it like it is an evil person or a bad sign or an ill omen. So I was thinking it was Sauron, but then when it crashed, it's just like a naked humanoid, and I don't think that would be like Sauron's appearance. Um, but potentially like I don't know, it could be like Tom Bombadil, it could be like one of the magic people, like
Like
Gandalf or
Gandalf
one of
and the
his
wizard.
wizards. But I don't
I
understand
want
why
it
it's a
to
bad
be
omen. Go ahead.
I want it to be Tom Bombadil so bad. So bad. Just because he's like this character who in the books pops up and disappears and has like no impact
Right.
on like the books, right? And so there's this mystery about him. I just sort of want to answer that mystery a little bit.
Right. Yeah. And well, I wondered, I mean, if there could be really like much of a satisfying inclusion of Tom Bombadil into this, or if he would probably just be the same character, like he's an immortal being who just kind of sings his way through life and is super duper powerful, but kind of has boundaries on that. So I wonder if they could, if it would be satisfying for him to be in this show at all. But yeah, but I would be curious, like Tom Bombadil's sort of a neutral, chaotic character. He's not, a bad omen like it seemed like they were introducing this character to be.
And you're saying it's a bad omen based on the Harfoot guy was reading the stars, right?
Right, and but then also the High Elf King, as the meteor was going overhead, the leaf in his hand like started rotting and doing that thing that
Oh
Tolkien
yeah, yeah,
Tolkien leaves do when something evil is nearby.
yeah.
So, um,
I can tell you that no matter who it is, good or bad, for Treebeard, it's going to be a bad omen if the leaves start shriveling up.
dude, I wonder if is Treebeard, is this before
We
his time?
definitely saw a glimpse of the Ents when the meteor was flying over, and there was like a smaller tree person moving around, and I hope that's the Entwives.
I do think that there was some rumor that the Entwives were going to be in this, so I think we're going to see some female dwarves, some Entwives, and as a broad stroke, like we have a lot of female leads, which frankly has just not really been the case in Lord of the Rings before, except for like Éowyn had that good, she killed that the Witch King,
But she was still not like a main character.
right? She was sort of
So I would say she's a supporting role.
right, but like there are definitely several main female character leads in this, and my wife was
Hmm.
pretty excited to see that. it could be great. Like it could be really awesome. Like they seem like really strong actresses. Um, Speaking of which, I think the only other, I mean, the main other plot line from this episode one was Arondir and Bronwyn, which is the elf from the
Oops.
Watchtower, and
Yeah.
um, and the human healer, and um, kind of the main thing I feel like that happened there was there was sort of that like generic evil that kind of manifests itself in the local flora and fauna, and they're gonna go hunt that down. But meanwhile, picked up Bronwyn's son somehow found like the sword of Sauron, or I don't know what it was exactly.
Something with some clear evil intent.
Yeah, like as best as I could tell, it seemed like probably Sauron's sword, or the hilt of it at least.
Yeah.
So maybe kind of calling back to Aragorn's sword from the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. It pretty much
Where
just
that's
looked like that as well.
but also it's like sort of continuing this theme that through Tolkien's world where like inanimate objects hold a lot of power. Like there's
Hmm.
obviously the ring, but then like the sword of Aragorn's sword. It's really embarrassing that the name is blanking on me. I was going to make fun of you for forgetting Legolas's name, but now I'm forgetting the name of the sword, and I have it hanging on the wall in my house. But like that sword holds a lot of power itself too, just like the symbol of it. So like finding this thing, whether it's the hilt of Sauron's sword or whatever it is, it clearly holds a lot of power in itself.
Right. Yeah, I think Tolkien's universe, there's a lot of sort of like generic evil, like or just like evil aura that kind of manifests objects and um, causes things to happen, right? Like we saw that cow was getting totally wrecked by some sort of
Oh,
nasty
that's
nasty
disgusting.
grass. Yeah, that was pretty disgusting. Um, just some sludge coming out of the udders, but yeah, some sort of evil is just affecting the local flora and fauna, and you see it like all the forests which have some sort of evil in it. The leaves are kind of weird and black, and everything's a little bit visually changed because of the evil. And I think we're gonna see maybe Bronwyn's son getting affected by this sword, kind of in the way that the ring might affect people as well.
Might affect Frodo, yeah. Or we saw it affect Frodo and Gollum and
Yeah,
Bilbo.
yeah. Oh, and then I guess I almost forgot the probably the final plot line happening was Elrond, and in the end, Celebrimbor was there, who's the master smith of the elves, and they're gonna go forge something or another.
Well, based on the title of the show, my guess is there's some rings of power in play in what he's building, but we'll see.
Okay, so you think the elves are building the rings of power? Um,
Uh, yeah, I mean, again, like I have a casual knowledge of Tolkien history, and I feel like I remember it like Sauron working with the elves to create the rings, or like the elves created their three rings and kept them secret from Sauron, or something like that. So I feel like there is a play here, like this is the beginning of that
hmm,
uh, as well. But something I learned, like you brought up Elrond, I did not realize that Elrond was not full elf
right.
until this show. I was watching and they said like only elf lords allowed. So in my head, I'm thinking, oh, he's just like a lower elf, right? He's not like a lord. But then my mom mentioned, oh, I didn't know he wasn't full elf, and I was like, you're wrong, mom. That's not what they meant. But I googled it, and he's both of his parents were half elven, so that means that he's not a full elf either. Which sort of like blew my mind because I always saw him as like this very powerful elf, like the elf of elves. I don't know.
Yeah, like he is I mean, he's the regal, like he's the guy in the Fellowship of the Ring that kind of like he's the head of the council, he's the wise dude, and the fact that he's not a full elf is pretty interesting. And then earlier on in the episode, when Arondir is talking to his fellow elf, and someone's calling him out for having a crush on Bronwyn, then they bring up like there's only been, one or two times in history where an elf and a human have had a romance basically. And
Which sort of makes it a little uncomfortable when you think about it. If it's only happened one or twice, and both of Elrond's parents were half, then there's some like weird family tree things going on there. But we can just ignore. But I mean, I also think that means that Arwen is not full elf, and that probably is the reason why she was able to like give up her unnatural long life. Like if she's a full elf, is she able to give up her unnatural long life? I don't know. It makes just more sense to me now, knowing that she's not like 100% elf.
right, interesting callback. Well said. So, I mean, that's kind of what we're dealing with in episode one. A lot of character introduction. Like, I think we're kind of experiencing the Game of Thrones effect here, where we're just introducing tons and tons of characters and plot lines all at once. And I think the satisfying unification of all those is probably what they're going to work towards in this first season, where we're going to establish another fellowship. But I mean, and I'm kind of thinking as well, like how exactly is this gonna end? Like, is it gonna end with that fight where Sauron loses the ring and becomes essentially the Eye over time? Because Sauron's gonna die probably in the end, but he's not gonna die.
Yeah, that is a interesting thing to think of because we know what happens in a
Hmm.
sense. Like we know that like Galadriel and Elrond are going to survive. We know that Sauron survives in a sense, in a certain form.
Hmm.
Um, so how do they wrap this storyline up satisfyingly enough to create a TV show worthy of as much money they're investing?
Right. Yeah, and that's what I want. Any sort of spin-off is fun, but I want it to introduce new content, I guess. Something that, we haven't heard before, we can't predict. And it's a lot harder to do, right, if you're basing it off of a book and some established lore, but that is what I'm hoping for ultimately.
Yeah, that'll be it'll be interesting to see how they do that. That's
Yeah.
why they get paid the big bucks and not me.
So, to close off this episode and hopefully every episode in the future, I I want to end with a sweet or sour of the episode. How are we feeling? Sweet being, we feel positively. It's gonna live up to our expectations for the show, and sour, we're disappointed and we don't think it's gonna live up to our expectations of the show. So you're up first, Drew. Rings of Power, episode one, sweet or sour.
All right, so I've actually thought long and hard about my reaction to the show, and my reaction is sweet. I'm just gonna throw that out there. It's sweet, and you're sweet and sour, and it's because I feel like people gatekeep Tolkien lore so much. Like they're just like, I know everything, blah blah blah. And Lord of the Rings, the movies were so well done that created a whole new generation of fans. That I don't think that Amazon, no matter how good the show is, I don't think Amazon could create a show that would fully satisfy people. I think people are going to complain no matter what, 100% no matter what. So I am making a choice to be positive on this show, to enjoy myself. I'm back in Middle Earth in a way that I haven't been in like 20 years. So I'm excited. I enjoyed myself watching it. It was visually stunning. I had fun. I'm excited to watch more.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Sorry. That's a good point. Like the music score, the visuals, the just sheer epicness of it all was really great. They probably had a few too many map scenes for my
Oh,
for my liking.
the
But
travel from one place to the other. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean that happened in the movies as well a little bit. But yeah, I fully agree that cinematically it's a very satisfying experience.
And like originally when I saw the trailer, I was a little afraid that it wasn't going to look great, but I thought it looked great on TV, and I'm making a choice to enjoy myself in Middle Earth 100%. But that's me. What about you, Tyler? Rings of Power, sweet or sour?
I love it, Drew. You know what? I'm gonna say uh, tentatively a little sour on the first episode,
Oh,
and
yes.
I think this is kind of going back to what I was saying already. And I'm kind of playing devil's advocate right here too, because I also am excited to be back in Middle Earth and enjoying the show and the lore and the musical score and the stunning everything and just diving deeper into Tolkien's universe. But I was a little bit disappointed in the direction that they're starting the show, which is just this grandiose, um, the biggest fight against good and evil that you could imagine. Like
Just too much, too fast.
too much, too fast, and you know what I really would like love in a show lately is something similar to like what The Mandalorian did, which I think as a side note, we're kind of in the golden age of spin-off shows right now where we have universes that are already established, but we're telling smaller stories in them now. But this is not a smaller story. This is as big a story as ever there was in Middle Earth. And
If not bigger than the original Lord of the Rings story.
but it is because it's the foundation of all of that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's kind of setting the stage for all of that. But like in The Mandalorian, they started small, just this bounty hunter, and then he found a kid, and then they find the Jedi and get into the galactic struggle against good and evil. I like that a little bit more. I like to get to know my characters before they're on the quest to destroy the ultimate evil in the universe. And so a little bit of me, like I almost wanted there to be another villain, like a different villain than Sauron, right? Because Sauron, he doesn't have much of a personality, or he hasn't so far. Like I don't even know. Like they might give him a face. If they give him a face in this, that'll be great because then we actually get to like hear his voice and see what he looks like. But he like wasn't really actually in the Lord of the
Any
Rings, the original trilogy. And so maybe they're going to develop what he is as a character, or he's just going to kind of remain this like giant faceless evil Death Star object that can destroy everything, um, but doesn't really have much of a personality. So I like to me the villains have always been a little bit lacking, and I kind of wish that they had introduced another villain, but not necessarily like the Troll King or the White Orc. Like those are kind of weak villains. Smaug though was kind of a good villain in The
Smaug
Hobbit.
was everything the Hobbit trilogy did.
Yeah,
Smaug, fantastic.
yeah, but he was on the screen for maybe 20 minutes total in the whole
Yeah.
trilogy. And so like The Lord of the Rings has never really had great villains. It's more of a fight against all-encompassing evil and generic badness, I guess.
And they sort of in like the original trilogy, they had smaller villains like Gollum, like Saruman, that had more of a face. So it will be interesting to see if, like, you're right. Right now, we've been introduced to like this big villain, Sauron, but will there be smaller powers that pop up throughout the story, and how will they deal with that?
Right.
Yeah,
And I think I just want to get a little more into the dirt and the grime of Middle Earth and the like the minutia. Like I want to see some small stories and get to enjoy some more minor characters, not necessarily the most important people in all of Middle Earth history. And that's just my kind of hot take on where we're starting right now. But like you, I'm actually really pretty hopeful for this whole thing and pretty excited that it's happening. And I think for all the naysayers out there, I think it's worth giving the show like 4 or 5 episodes to really get rolling a little bit because we don't even know what the plot is right now.
I think there's only like I think they only were gonna do 8 episodes. So if you're gonna give it 4 or 5 episodes, just give it 8.
Well, the last two will probably be like 3 hours each, and then I don't know. But I mean, 8 hours of content is still pretty big, though we are splitting it over a million different subplots right now. But yeah, so I think yeah, if you want to give it a full season to kind of really build steam, and even Game of Thrones, I don't think anyone would say the first season was that great. Like way back then, I think the appeal was more about seeing female anatomy uh, on a TV show. That was kind of the draw for everyone at first, right?
No.
It was scandalous.
As a gay man, that was not my draw to Game of Thrones.
Valid enough, valid enough.
I will say my mother wants to watch the Rings of Power like as a family, like with my sister. But she said, I'm gonna watch episode one on my own just in case they do the things that Game of Thrones did. Because that would just be uncomfortable. So she was afraid that they were going to throw in some gratuitous sex scenes.
That would be really surprising in the Lord of the Rings universe. I think everyone seems mostly asexual in Lord of the Rings.
I I told her, I was like, there's absolutely no way that's gonna happen. But we'll
Like
see.
there are very few actual romances even written into the Lord of the Rings.
Well, yeah, like we have Arwen and Aragorn, but that's a romance that's already like 100 years old, and we're there at like the tail end of it.
Right. But I guess I mean there's some romance already brewing between our elf guy and our healer woman. But anyway, so I think kind of to wrap it all up, I think the way that this show's been set up is to like it wants to be the next big thing. It wants to be the next Game of Thrones for lack of really any other good epic high fantasy comparison shows. Um, and we'll see if it ever achieves that. I think what we might be finding is it's a bit of a slow burn, and the reason I think Game of Thrones does so well is you get really emotionally invested, and then they're able to kill off your characters. So I don't know if I mean no one really dies in Tolkien uh, for the most part.
Boromir would beg to differ.
Boromir died, but he was kind of, he was kind of a broken character. None of the good characters really have died before, so we would see that would be sort
And
of a brave way to write the show,
we know that Galadriel and Elrond don't die, so that sort of like takes that potential away as well.
right? But
So,
so
but all
um,
right, Tyler's a little sour.
just a little sweet and sour and hopeful. But I think we end it there unless you have anything else.
I'm good.
Well, thanks, Drew. This has been the very first episode of The Rings of Power, Sweet or Sour. We hope you enjoyed, and talk to our manager if you have any comments
Or complaints.
or complaints.